Hi, I'm Casey with VSAC. I'm also joined by Adriana from VSAC as well. And we're just going to be kind of the folks asking questions and moderating the session. So yeah, you guys are all in the arts and AV tech and communications breakout room. Hopefully that's where you want it to be. So basically what we're going to do is I'm going to ask the presenters to introduce themselves, your name, job title, and where you work. And we'll have everybody do that, and then we'll get started with questions. So let's see, Patrick, do you want to start?
Hello, everybody. My name is Patrick Ross. Can you hear me all right? So I'm a musician, I'm a teacher, and that's pretty much it. I mean, I just do a lot.
Perfect. Thank you. How about you, Brian?
Hey there, I'm Brian Warwick. I'm an audio engineer and also a professor of music and audio production at Northern Vermont University, Linden.
Okay.
All right,
great.
cool. So Gottfried is my name. I live in Colchester. Originally from New York City, born and raised. I've been a professional entertainer for 48 years, singer, musician, DJ, and I write children's stories also.
Awesome. Thank you, Corey. Well, welcome.
And a singer-songwriter.
Nice. So for the students who are on the call, we have to keep everybody muted. But if you have questions, just type them in the chat and we will follow along with those and follow up. You're welcome to ask a question at any time. If you have anything that you wanted to ask right now to get us started, we welcome you to add something to the chat. Okay. Not seeing much there, I guess we will go ahead and get started. So maybe we'll start with you, Patrick. What professional video editing equipment do you use?
Me?
Yeah.
Professional video editing equipment. Whatever's available on my MacBook. I think it's the built-in software, because I don't do as much video editing as audio editing.
Okay.
I think it's iMovie is what it is. And if I have bigger projects, I outsource it.
Thank you. How about you, Brian?
Yeah, I don't use any video editing software at all, though I do collaborate with a lot of people who use Media Composer, Avid Media Composer. I'm primarily in audio, so I'm primarily working in Pro Tools, which is also another Avid company.
Great. And how about you, Corey?
For videos, when I produce my videos, I use VideoPad from NCH products, NCH software for video.
Great.
For audio, it's a different software.
Okay, thank you. Do you each just want to talk about a little bit about your journey to getting to where you are right now and kind of how that looked for you? I guess, Patrick, we'll have you start again.
Sure. I grew up on the Canadian border in Vermont, a Franco-American township. My mother is Quebecois. My first language is French. And in the French-Canadian tradition, fiddle music was, and still is, a big component. And so I grew up, dyed in the wool in the French-Canadian fiddle genre. And then as I grew older, I just, I found new instruments to explore because I had a foundation in playing the fiddle. And so I've explored violin music and then all other stringed instruments. And so fast forward, now I'm 30 years old and I teach full time and perform when there's not a virus swarming the world.
Thank you. How about you, Brian?
Let's see. I'm actually originally a native of Massachusetts, from right outside of Worcester, Massachusetts. And I ended up going to college at Boston at Berklee College of Music. From there, I ended up moving to Los Angeles, where I was out there for about 13 years or something like that. And I was in a recording. I worked for 2 recording studios, Record Plant Recording Studios in Hollywood and Westlake Recording Studios in West Hollywood. And from there, just made some connections and started recording albums and producing albums. And then I had an awesome opportunity about, now it's about 4 years ago, to move to Northern Vermont and start teaching what I learned out there. And I've been loving it up here ever since.
Awesome. And where are you teaching right now?
Northern Vermont University, Linden.
Okay, awesome. And how about your journey, Corey?
Well, first off, Patrick, I need to know that pretty guitar you were holding, was that a Strat?
Yeah, it's a Strat that my dog, my husky, passed away 2 years ago and was reincarnated into a California Strat.
Oh, very cool. I saw it and I was holding up my 69 Telly. That this was my first electric guitar back in '72 when I got out of high school. And I've had it ever since. It's been with me the whole time. It used to be purple and I varnished it down and you could just barely see a little purple streaks in it. It's so cool. And the guy who owned it before was a Leatherman. So he has this really cool leather pickguard on it with flowers and stuff. So it's seen a lot of gigs. Anyway,
Awesome.
my journey, I've always, I've been singing publicly since I was 4 years old. That was, I'm 66, so you do the math. I started, when I was in middle school, I used to play trumpet. In Manhattan, I was part of the Borough-wide band and orchestra, which was a crazy time because in junior high school, as we called it in the city, used to take the A train down to the Museum of Natural History and rehearse on Saturday mornings, which was really crazy because what kid in middle school would want to go to, get up early on a Saturday morning? But great experience. So I've always been in bands and orchestras and stuff. And then when I got to high school, they had such an awful music program to the high school. I auditioned for music and art, but didn't make it on trumpet. Should have done it on baritone horn. Awful music program. And I decided, what's the one instrument that the girls are really going to go for? So I picked guitar. And that was a mistake because all the girls back then loved the drummers. But I started playing guitar in high school. And then as soon as I graduated, I knew what I wanted to do, which was to play in a rock and roll band. And as soon as I graduated, I started my own entertainment business and been performing ever since. So, and then I became a DJ about 25 years ago and added that to my entertainment repertoire. And then just a few years ago, I started writing children's stories to add to the business equation. So, ways to keep busy and stay home.
Yep. And since you mentioned, oh, go ahead. Is it okay? I was just going to say, since you mentioned high school, would you just talk a little bit, I think we have middle school and high school students in the session today. What kind of suggestions would you have for them about how to pursue their interests in music and throughout middle and high school?
Asking me?
Yeah.
Oh, that's easy. Get involved in any way you can. Band, orchestra, chorus. If you're more interested in the technical sides of things, like being a sound engineer or into video, whatever, just dive in anywhere you can. Make friends. Relationships are everything in this business. You want to establish as many relationships as you can and connections, and just create a network, expand your network, and just ask a million questions of everybody. Drive everyone that is in the business crazy, asking tons of questions. Because people like Brian and Patrick, these guys, they have the chops, and they're the ones that are going to teach you, what to do, where to go. And if they don't know, they're gonna refer somebody to you that they know, and that's how you expand your network. But just dive in, pick an area, any area in the equation, whether it's technical or creative, and technical can be creative too. Pick an area and just say, I'm going to walk down that path for a while, and just do it. Just dive in. If you're a musician, if you're interested in playing an instrument, pick the instrument and just start playing. YouTube is a phenomenal resource. Go on YouTube and say, how do I play the piccolo? How do I play the cello? How do I play guitar? There's 1,000 teachers on YouTube. So,
Corey, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
With regards to when you speak about relationships are everything, I totally agree with you on that. I find myself recently kind of juggling, and this is the question, is how do you balance that, like going out and meeting people and going to networking events and establishing these relationships and keeping them alive and keeping them genuine? And how do you balance that with the solitude in the important writing time and the seclusion of just having space to do stuff instead of always being out making those connections?
That's a great question, Patrick. First of all, you have to determine where you are in the business equation, or if you're even part of the business. For a lot of creative people, they don't have a clue to how to be in business when it comes to their art form, whether it's music or art, the visual or the audio arts and performing arts. Most people don't have a clue what the business side is. So you have to decide, first of all, are you going to be business minded? Are you going to treat show business as a business or not? If you just want to be the artist, which is cool, just, you don't, then you're focused mostly on the creative side of things. So you go make friends with people like you or Brian or any musician or artist you could find. If you're interested in the business, see, I was always the business manager of all my bands. And I was the one that talked to the club owners. I was the one that talked to the recording studios. I was the lead front person. So I had to also schedule my time out and say, okay, this is the time I'm writing. This is the time I'm rehearsing. This is the time I'm rehearsing with the band. This is the time that I'm making phone calls. This is the time that I'm going to networking, meetings. More advanced I got in business, BNI is a great international business resource, Business Network International. It's a global organization, so I was part of that for a while. As a matter of fact, I was the assistant director in the state of Vermont for a short time, and it exposed me to a lot of people. But the point is, Patrick, you really need to, you got to schedule out your time, just like you would with anything, with any other appointments like gigs or anything like that. And you have to commit to what your calendar says. So if you're networking between the hours of 2 and 4, today, you have to do that. You have to make the phone calls. You have to set up, if it, before, pre or post COVID, you're making appointments to go out and meet and talk with people. Now I had it personally. I was always married and I always had children from early on. I've been married for 42 years now out of my 48-year career. So I didn't go downtown to Nectar's in downtown Burlington and hang out with the musicians. I was home helping change diapers or taking care of the kids or paying attention to my wife. So, I was very selective, and that doesn't mean that I was reclusive, but everybody's got to make their own decisions and make their own choices and recognize that the relationships, the networking, the rehearsing, the interaction, those are all important factors in your equation. And you have to just coordinate and schedule it in, and maybe sacrifice things that, aren't as important, like playing video games or watching TV. Although I love to watch movies, but you have to make choices. Does that kind of answer your question?
Oh, absolutely. I think the takeaway there, for any middle schoolers or high schoolers is that time management has been something that I've had to really kind of take a much closer look at as I transitioned from my 20s to my 30s. In my 20s, it was just like, I'm going to go and do whatever I want because I don't give a. And then I hit my 30s and it's like, okay, but I want to do this and I want to do this. And so it's like how to manage time. And that doesn't come overnight. So just kind of be mindful of what a day looks like and try to stick some of those things into your day that might not be easy and or fun, but will pay you back later on. So.
Yeah, but Patrick, one little thing, don't try to put it into your day. Schedule it and commit it into your day if you're serious about anything, whether it's, whatever occupation you choose. You have to schedule it and commit to it and execute the actions. If you don't take actionable steps, it's just an intention or a dream, and those are fine, but it won't get you to where you want to go. And you're young and strong, Patrick. You got this.
I'm feeling it.
Brian, did you want to add anything about high school, what to do in high school?
Yeah, I think the most important thing, if I look back, and I can only look back on kind of like, my career and where it's brought me. I think the most important thing is if you are interested in music, trying to learn an instrument. I think that's hugely important, and studying that instrument. And I love how Corey mentioned, like, hey, you can get something, man, I love Facebook Marketplace these days because there's just so many cheap instruments that you can find out there. But you can even get something kind of cheap and start down kind of a YouTube journey and see if you dig it, and then go from there. If you're starting to enjoy what you're doing, then you can, take some lessons. if that's not a possibility too, if there's any kind of theater productions, I think it's great. It gets people up on stage. It gets people used to presenting. For me, my brother was an actor, so I tried to go down that route. It turned out I was terrible at that. He was good. I was awful. And then, but what I kind of fell into is I fell into the technical side of things. So, sometime mid high school, if there was a production coming into the auditorium, I was the person who was going to run sound for it. It was just kind of default. They're like, "Oh, you need to run sound? Call Brian." I was also playing drums for the musical pit bands. So yeah, I think that's a way to try to get involved. And I know we might be talking to some students where they may not have a strong music program, they may not have a strong theater program, but start venturing out a little bit, because I bet your community has some sort of community theater that you could get involved with, and you could start, sharing your gift.
Awesome. Thank you.
May I add on to that?
Yeah, of course.
That's great stuff, and maybe you could see my wall behind me. I'm an actor, singer, dancer, director, and sound designer for a lyric theater company. But one thing I wanted to add, Brian, to any student listening, again, like Patrick and I were talking about, relationships are everything. And if you don't know where to start, it's easy. You have teachers all over your school. You have counselors all over your school. You have parents, adults all around you. Just go up to the most comfortable person that you know and just say, "I would like to go do this. I would like to get involved with theater. I would like to get involved in that. Where would you recommend I go?" Everybody's got an opinion. Everybody's got a finger to point you in the right direction. All you got to do is open your mouth and ask somebody you know. And if they don't know, they'll tell you somebody who does know. Just ask, open your mouth. Just start walking down the path.
Corey, I think that's a great segue into one of the questions we have, which involves how does your work make a difference in your community or the communities you're a part of, and how can the next generation entering the workforce make a difference with that job?
Who are you asking?
I can ask you.
Oh, sure. Well, I'd like to think that as an entertainer, most and foremost, I bring joy into people's lives. When I perform, especially, being authentically me, for some reason, I'm able to breathe easier when I'm on stage than I am out in the real world. I'm more comfortable on the Flynn stage with, 1,200-1,400 people in front of me than I am being out in a cafe somewhere. So, I feel like that's where I belong. And once you make that determination, then it's easy to just be you. And if it's easy just to be you and you want to serve, then you serve in the way that you can. I serve people by singing and playing an instrument, and writing and doing covers and, DJing a wedding. It's my focus is to be accommodating and to bring joy into people's lives and help them experience the moment that we're in right now and put everything else just in a timeout and just living in that moment. So I feel that's the benefit that I bring into my community at large is great joy, maybe some intellectual thought, maybe some emotion, of all sorts because of what I might be singing in that moment and and the story I'm telling. But yeah, joy.
Great, Patrick or Brian?
Yeah, I'll step up here. So my day job, I teach private lessons, and I have 70 students. And the requirement for anybody who I coach is that they learn one, they do one, and then teach one, right? So not necessarily on one day, but over the scope of the time that they're taking lessons, they learn, they do, and they teach. So the teaching part and having them take on an apprentice or a student, even for one lesson, that's the sort of the passing on and the community involvement. Also, the age of my students range from 7 to 73. All of them are encouraged but not required to join me on stage in a performance. So at
Nice.
whatever concert that I'm doing, if it's nearby, if they can get to it, then I'll invite them up when they feel ready or when I feel that they're ready. And then they get to experience what it's like to be in front of an audience. And so that is one way that I connect community to what I do.
Very cool.
Yeah, and I think for me, as you know, because I kind of play two roles here, the audio engineer and the audio production professor here. I think as the audio engineer, the way I see my community impact, it's a little bit on a more grand scale, but I'm capturing a performance, and yeah, it might be in a recording studio, but it's a performance that's going to connect with people for years to come, and it's going to be something that's kind of a sign of the times. It's going to be the sound of that time. And I've had a great deal of luck to work with one of my clients that not only do we get to create the sound of the time, but we get to make fun of it as well. I've been really fortunate for the last few years. I've been recording Weird Al Yankovic, who just makes fun of every popular song. If you're not familiar with him, get familiar with him, because he's a great way of kind of tapping into the sound of the time and just watch it be parodied and be made fun of in the most gentle way, which is fantastic. And as an audio professor, I think that, you know, I weirdly got into audio engineering to try to inspire people in some way, but as an audio professor, it's just really great to be able to take everything that I've learned and to give it back to students and to give my opinions on their projects on a day-to-day basis. Like I've always had like a very like open email system where it's like, hey, you're working on something, send it to me. You hear something cool, send it to me, because I want to know what they're listening to. I want to know what they're working on, and they want to have feedback on that. So I always like being that sounding board for my students and for the general public, just to keep music moving on.
Awesome, thank you. Another question, you know, we might have is going back to some of the applicable skill sets for every job. What are some examples that you use creativity or critical thinking in your work? Creativity is a little bit more obvious, but yeah, critical thinking skills, creativity, flexibility in your work schedule, things like that. You can go, Brian.
Let's see. I mean, it's interesting. So as an audio engineer, my my schedule is flexible, yet I have like really hard deadlines. So you know, there are some days where yeah, I could take a day off or something like that, but it might mean the next day that I'm doing like a 14-hour day of work. So it's really interesting that there is some flexibility on that front, but you always have that kind of looming deadline of when things have to be provided. So yeah, so I try to I try to schedule myself in just like really, really small chunks. Also, and I think everybody here could kind of admit to this, is that there's a limitation on your creativity during a day. So, you know, you can't be 100% creative for an 8-hour day. It just doesn't work. So I try to kind of break that up a little bit in my daily schedule. Well, I'll have some more managerial things that I have to do later in the day, kind of like the just the stuff, not the stuff that's mindless per se, but the stuff that's relatively easy for me. I just know for me in the morning when I get up, that's my most creative time. That's when I can do a large scale task and start that. And then as the day kind of progresses, then my creative juices kind of peter out. So I kind of do some of the more easy stuff as the day goes.
Corey.
Well, yeah, Brian, that was well stated. One thing I would add on to that is I've learned over the years not to wait for the creative juices to flow. All the best writers that I know in all fields, or artists that I know in all fields, they all say the same thing. You commit to starting, and as you dive in, that's when the creative juices, start flowing because you dove in. Where a second ago, all you want to do is hang out and watch TV, and then you say, no, I'm committed to doing this regardless of what my emotions are saying, and you just sit yourself down in your studio or wherever it is, and you just say, all right, let's start. And even if you're just noodling on your guitar for a few minutes to help you cross over into that creative process, so be it. But it's a discipline. It's a discipline. But as far as critical thinking, where you're actually analyzing facts, in my field as an entertainer, there's so many intangibles, but the facts that I have to recognize is, number one, what is it that I ultimately really want? What do I want in my life? And that changes. Being 66, I don't want the same things that my 18-year-old self wanted, or my 25-year-old self wanted, or my 35-year-old self wanted. I'm 66 now. I want what my 66-year-old wants, which isn't necessarily playing Madison Square Garden anymore. It may just be wanting to just gig at the Flynn, which is, fine for me. So the facts for me are, how am I going to eat? How am I going to pay my mortgage? How am I going to contribute to my community? A lot of that takes money. So a part of my critical thinking comes in terms of, how can I take my talents and monetize them so that I can meet my obligations and also have fun? Because if it ain't fun, it's not worth doing. That's why I refer to myself as a funtrepreneur, which is an entrepreneur that only does things that are fun. For example, I'm an avid pickleball player. I don't know if you folks know what pickleball is, but it's a great sport, and I teach it. And I was able to figure out how to make money from teaching pickleball, something that I absolutely love to do. Same thing in music. Like Patrick, I don't have students anymore because I'm too busy, but I used to have students, and I love teaching my students. But the critical thinking part is, what are the facts in your equation? And you have to acknowledge those, recognize those, and then make those happen. Does that pretty much kind of answer it? Good. I'll treat myself to a sip.
So I'll take the a different approach to the answer, just because, at least during this time, during COVID, I started a project, a band, and so we've been doing rehearsals every Friday night from 6 to 9, and I've been writing a ton of music, which has been great because I've actually had the time to do that. But speaking of critical thinking and how to be present and how to be aware of things that are going on. For example, in a band situation, I'm kind of putting myself on the stage here and just imagining what role I take as a band leader now, and having to be aware of all the various goings on that are happening with the various members of the band, right? And so how to think on my feet, how to be, a leader, but yet how to be lenient as well, and how to be considerate, and how to talk with people instead of talking at them, how to listen, how to be that person that is driving the bus, but not driving it out of control and not being bossy, but yet trying to stay on target, right? So there's a lot of stuff here for any middle schoolers or high schoolers that might be listening to this. In what I do, and probably in lots of different careers, there's people skills that you can't necessarily learn out of a textbook. And so keeping an ear to the ground, keeping it in the back of your mind, like when you're having a conversation with somebody and the conversation is not going how you would have hoped it would go, like how to be able to pivot, how to be able to kind of read somebody else's energy and not kind of meet it this way, but kind of work with it. I guess that's a big part of my daily and weekly career critical thinking, is how to not just bull and tear my way through the day, but yet get the job done at a high level.
Thanks, Patrick. And I actually have a follow-up question for all of you. As a creative myself, how do you deal with burnout, especially during COVID and the pandemic? How do you deal with just the feelings of exhaustion and, you know, using too much of your creative juices at once? What are some strategies you face burnout with?
Who's going first?
I guess Brian can go first.
Coffee.
I already tried that.
Yeah, that's I probably shouldn't recommend that. I think the burnout that happens, I think trying to change your mindset about it. And I like what Corey was saying, where he had kind of a set schedule, where he'd be like, you know what, it doesn't matter what happens here, right? It doesn't matter what happens in this moment. Take some of the pressure off the creative aspect of it, because we don't, you know, it's hard to be creative if someone's leaning over your shoulder being like, create something great, create it right now, right? That's just not going to happen. When I've worked with artists in the past, it just starts with a little spark, and there has to be something that kind of generates that spark. And it might be that time where you're just noodling around on an instrument, or you're writing something, piece of poetry on a piece of paper that turns into a song. I know a bunch of songwriters that I used to work for. They used to just keep a notebook, and that notebook was to help with burnout. So basically, when they were feeling inspired, or let's say they were around town and they saw a situation, and they were like, oh, that would be a good concept for a song, right? Like, little girl pets a dog, right? And they just write that down in a notebook. So when they have that time, or when they get that little bit of writer's block, they break out the notebook and they just start going through it, and they're like, oh wait, little girl pets a dog, I remember that. And then they start moving on with that concept, so they don't feel like they're starting from scratch necessarily.
Right.
I wanted to add, I think that's a great point. My brother used to write a lot of music, and he actually, every morning was the first thing he did. It's like, I'm not going to get up and look at my phone or go on Facebook or whatever. Sit down with his journal and just start writing. So I think that's great advice.
Yeah,
Pen and paper.
if you don't mind, I'd like to elaborate what Brian was laying down. Part of my tricks, and everybody's got to find their own tricks, what works for them and their own personality. And when those little bits of inspiration come up out of nowhere, like Brian was saying, it's having the discipline to have a process in place ready to go. Because what happens typically with people like me is, when I get into the creative mindset and the technical part of it starts interrupting and distracting me, it takes away from the creative process. So I've learned through the years things like, I get a lot of great ideas when I'm driving, and you can't be writing notes. So I'll go, so my process is, hey Siri, send an email to Corey Neal, which is my middle name to differentiate me from my son, right? And I'll say, and then I'll just say, possible song, and then in the message I'll say, and then I'll just give some lyrics. But then when I get home, the important thing is it transfers to the clipboard, and then I just go through all the different things on the clipboard, song titles, phrases, whatever. And then, like Brian was saying, when when it comes to the point where you're just sitting yourself down and you go, what do I do now? He's right. You just look to your clipboard and go, oh, what kind of stands out? But the important thing is, that I've always learned, is, like Brian said, you take the weight off your shoulders. Don't think in terms of, all right, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write the greatest, most perfect song ever. No, forget all that. Just sit down and just write. Just go for it. Just go for whatever it is. Whether it's good or bad or indifferent is somebody else's opinion. And that's none of your business. You just write to please yourself. Just sit down, just take the walk, go on the path, and boom. If it's gonna happen, it's gonna happen. Now getting back to your original question, what was exactly the original question? Because I want to make sure I replied to it.
It was, how do you deal with burnout?
Okay. So three really important things for me. Number one, forcibly make yourself take a break. And that break could mean a walk, on a country road. A lot of times for me, it's a nap in my favorite, recliner. Whatever taking a break means for you, go watch a movie, whatever it is, just disengage and distract yourself or reconnect yourself with something else. So that's number one. Make yourself take a break. Number two, exercise is a great way to change your physical and mental minds. You're set at that moment. Exercise is great, and I'll just go on my treadmill and I'll just start. For me, I watch a movie while I'm walking on the treadmill, so I'm doing two things at once. And then the last thing is find the creative people in your life and just connect with them. Call Brian, call Patrick, and say, "Hey, man, I'm toasted. What are you up to?" Find the people that are engaged. Don't talk to the people that are doing nothing and hanging out, just doing nothing in their lives. Talk to people like these two guys and say, "Hey, what's up? I'm like toasted. I really need to speak to somebody that's engaged. What are you up to?" And then you get all fired up again because of what they're into, and you go, "Oh, Patrick, oh, Brian, that's so exciting. I am so inspired. Hey, gotta go, brother. See you later. You just gave me an idea," and then you're back on track. Now, it doesn't always work, but any combination or any one of those three things, in my experience, work most of the time.
So I don't use a notebook as much as I use my recording audio memos. I have hundreds and hundreds of them, and I go through them once a week, and I put certain ones at the top that I'll kind of look at the ideas that I collected while I was driving, while I was hiking, while I was lying in bed. But as far as dealing with burnout, so it came at the right time for me, if there is a right time, in that I was kind of coming into summer and I had overcommitted myself. And so I was already feeling like in early March that I had so many things on the books in the summer, and I was like, okay, cool, I can do this. I got this. I got all these gigs, and I was having some physical things happening because I was playing so much and the repetitive motion, and it was trying to work it all out with like exercise and physical therapy and all that stuff. COVID came at the right time just because all those gigs and all those commitments that I had just vanished. And my lesson schedule stayed intact, thankfully. But I would say that to answer the question of how do I deal with burnout, it has now been that I am going to be super aware of how to not overcommit myself and not just say yes to everything. Because there was a time where it was like, yeah, I'm a dad, I'm a husband, and got to pay the rent, all this stuff. And it's hustle, make the money, take the gig, do it all. But that came at a cost too. And so now it's a little bit more balanced out, and, sitting down with my partner, my wife, and like, okay, we don't need to make as much money as long as we just figure out how to live. It's not about always having the money. It's always about, it's like having the time and the sanctity and the quality of life. And so not overcommitting myself. If I committed to something and then a week later I'm like, oh man, I wish I had not said yes to that. Then I try to analyze what was it about that I didn't really want to do, so that next time when something like that comes around, I will have the balls to say, no, I don't want to do that. And I'll know why.
Yep.
Great. So we have about 9 minutes left. So I just want to encourage the students here to type in the chat if they have any questions that have come up while they've been listening to you all. Maybe even talk a little bit about themselves and what specifically their interests are, and see if we can get these guys to answer some. While you're doing that, I'll ask Rob Thayer's question in the chat, which is, as you think about your own journeys, what would you say was an important opportunity you found that helped your pathway to your career? And I can go with Corey this time.
So one specific situation, you mean?
Sure.
Oh, wow. There's so many. What would you say was an important opportunity? I guess one that sticks out is when I was gigging at the Pickle Barrel down in Killington. And my band was the host band at the time. And there's a band from the 60s called The Association. And they were performing on that night, and they were using RPA. And they called ahead and said at the time I was playing bass, they called ahead and said their bass player, something happened, and can they borrow the bass player of the band that was there, which was me. And I said, oh, I know who you are and I love your material, but I don't know anything about it. And he said, no problem, we'll send you the charts. Just provide the bass. So long story short, they sent the charts up. I had a morning, afternoon to rehearse their charts. And then I performed with them that night. And they offered me a job and to tour with them, to do their national tour. And I declined because I had my own band and we were on the path doing originals, and it was a smoking band, and I just wasn't interested, I wasn't interested in doing it. But that they wanted me had such an impression on me that it just, in my mind, it was sort of like validation. I was good enough to go with this national act. And that was a good shot in the arm, and it was one of the many significant experiences in my life that just contributed to helping me continue on my path.
Really quickly, Jesse, are they allowed to unmute themselves? Yeah, okay. Yeah, if you could please type in the chat the questions. We're just doing this for privacy reasons. Moving.
Yeah, and I think everybody's automatically set to mute, and I can't unmute them. So.
We do have the ability, but I think for privacy reasons we're not allowed to, because this is recorded.
Right.
Moving on to Patrick.
So the example that comes to mind has been that 7 years ago now, up until that mark, 7 years ago, I'd been performing musically and being on many stages. And then through the grapevine, I ended up establishing a relationship and then working with a stand-up comedian and a professional actor. And so now over the past 7 years, we've done a number of tours together, myself and the guy who's known as the Logger. His name is Rusty DeWeese.
Great guy. Yeah.
And he taught me a lot and is still teaching me a lot, because he comes from a different angle of performing / entertainment. And he's an astute business person as well. And so I think without going into too much detail about that relationship, I'll say that one of the biggest takeaways from working with Rusty has been that the better understanding of the two things that I feel are most involved in what I do. There's being an artist, and then there's being an entertainer, and then there's virtue in both of those. And so being an artist to me is more like, I'm going to do whatever I want, and it doesn't matter who likes it. It's because I want to do it, and it's something that needs to come out through me. The entertainment side of things is more about like that empathy that goes into, well, what do people want? And so to find that balance between what I want to do and what people want, and then the whole aspect of like acting and being and taking on a persona on stage and breaking that third wall, and how to use movements, right? And how to be on the stage, not just musically, but completely.
Hey, may I just add on, since you refer to Rusty, There's another part of Rusty. He's a friend of mine, and he's an amazing business person. And marketing promotions is one of his fortes. So in the Rusty the Logger equation, a lot has to do not just his creativity, but his business mindset too.
Right.
So really quickly, Kiana asks, she wants to learn how to get better at an instrument, but she has never had the focus to continue to learn it. So is there any way to focus on trying to learn the instrument such as the piano? And maybe one person answer this question. We have about 3 minutes left.
You want me to, or Patrick, you want to, or?
Whoever feels
Well,
qualified enough.
I've been a teacher for many years of many things, and one thing I always tell my students and say to myself is, if you want to get better at anything, you have to commit to starting. And even if you just said, I'm going to do it for 5 minutes today, but you commit to those 5 minutes and do it every day, and then you expand it to 10, and then 15, and then 20, just incremental, depending on what your life schedule is like. But if you want to get good at anything, especially an instrument, you have to put in the time. There's no way in the if or it's about it. You have to put in the time. It doesn't just magically happen. Actually, I take that back. If you put in the time, it magically happens.
Thank you, Corey. Well, we have a couple of minutes left. Is there a way that these students, if they have any other questions or if they want to have a separate Zoom meeting or reach out, that they can reach out to any of you?
Absolutely, anyone. Yep.
Yeah, through my website, patrickrossmusic.com.
How do we give out the contact info?
Maybe you can type it in the chat once we get back into the regular session, perhaps, or maybe there's an opportunity then to,
Okay.
we can look into that.
Or they could whoever wants to get a hold of me could contact VSAC. Anna has all my information.
Yeah, and as for me, you can go to Northern Vermont University, and I should be way down on the faculty page because my last name is Warwick, but my email is just brian.warwick@northernvermont.edu.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for this awesome interview. I learned a lot. I don't know about you guys, but
I did too.
Yeah.
Me too.
Jesse, do you have any final thoughts?
I don't think so. Just to say thank you so much for taking the time to do this for students. It's super informative, and I'm sure they've learned a lot. You guys had some really awesome tips for students thinking about going into this field. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Oh, we're getting some thank yous in the chat too, if you can't see it, from students, so, which is great.
Great.
Thank you, guys. It was great to be part of this panel. Thank you.
Nice to meet you all.
Yeah, this was great. Thanks, everybody.
Nice to meet you as well. Bye. Okay.
All right, so should we stop recording?
Yeah, I'm just trying to make sure I do this correctly. I think you could just hit it and then save it.
Yeah, I think it's